In this video, we will compile a model written in the Microsoft Codename M language. We will then load the resulting image file into the codename Oslo repository database. Here we have 4 M source files that make up the Human Resources module. Let's take a quick look at the content of each file. First, I'll clear the command prompt with the cls command. The address.m file contains a definition of an address type. This type contains fields that describe an instance of an address. The addresses.m file defines an extent named addresses. This extent is a collection of addressed instances. In this example, the extent also initializes 2 addresses. Note that the addresses extent depends on the address type, but there are no export or import statements in these files. The M compiler recognizes that both source files define aspects of the same Human Resources module, so explicit export and import statements are not required. The employee.m file contains a definition of an employee type. Note that the employee address field refers to an instance of an address in the addresses extent. The employees.m file defines an extent named employees. This extent is a collection of employee instances. Although all of these types and extents could have been defined in the same M source file, a best practice is to keep each extent and type in its own file. Real-world models typically require more detailed M code. Having these extents and types in their own files improves the manageability of M models. Now that we have our model defined in M, we want to load this model into the repository database. This requires 2 tools installed by the codename Oslo SDK. The M compiler, m.exe, compiles the code into an image file. The M command line utility, mx.exe, takes this image file and loads it into the repository database. To easily use these tools, we need to include their location in our path. We're going to add the Oslo SDK bin directory to the path environment variable. As with most command line tools, you can pass /? to the M compiler for usage options. We're not going to cover all of the possible compiler options in this example. Our goal is to compile our M source files into an image file that can be loaded with the M command line utility. Let's clear the command prompt and compile our M files. This command compiles all of the M files in the current directory. The T-switch uses the repository option. This instructs the compiler to create a data model that targets the Oslo repository database. If you want to target a generic SQL Server 2008 database, you can specify a target of tSQL10. The P-switch uses the image option. This instructs the compiler to generate an image file. The image file can then be installed into a database. The O-switch provides the output file name for the image, which is humanresources.mx. We can now see that there is a humanresources.mx file in the current directory. This image file is really just an archive of preprocessed files to make it easier to load the model into a database. I'm going to rename the image file to have a .zip extension in order to look at the files it contains. Although we don't have time to thoroughly review these files, you are free to examine these preprocessed files on your own. However, the important point here is that this image contains all of the information necessary to load this model into the repository database. The next step uses the M command line utility mx.exe to load this image file into the repository database. The I switch specifies an input of our previously compiled image file, humanresources.mx. The DB switch provides the name of the target database, which is repository. There are other options, but in this example, we're relying on several defaults. Unless otherwise specified, the M command line utility uses integrated authentication to access the default SQL Server instance on the current machine. The warnings we see here are the result of initializing 2 address instances in our addresses extent. However, the insert operations did succeed, so these warnings can be ignored in this example. Let's quickly verify that the repository now holds our new model schema. I'm going to query the repository database using the SQL Server command line tool. When our M model was loaded into the repository, the Human Resources module became a SQL Server schema. This query lists all of the database objects that are now part of that new schema. These objects have been created to support specific repository design patterns. Although we don't have the time to discuss these patterns in this video, you can easily see the connections between the addresses and employees extents in our M code and the corresponding tables and views in the database. At this point, you could explore the model further using a database tool such as SQL Server Management Studio, or you could create an application that reads and writes data into this new model schema. In this video, we started with a model of human resources data, written in M. We used two Oslo SDK tools to load this model into SQL Server. m.exe compiled the M source files into a single image file, and mx.exe loaded the image file into the repository database. Thanks for watching, and look for more upcoming videos on the Oslo modeling platform.